The sun sets low over the sacred Ngwabe mountain, casting long shadows over the village of Ngwabe. The wind carries the whispers of the earth, stirring the ancient trees that have witnessed generations of life. The village stands steadfast, as it always has, rooted in memories and the teachings of ancestors. Amina returns from the city, her journey heavy with sorrow. Amina softly whispers to herself, "I've been away for too long. The city was bright, full of promises. But here I know the truth of who I am." The sounds of the village reach her ears: laughter, the clinking of cooking pots, children playing in the dirt. It's all so familiar, yet distant, like a song she used to sing but now can't recall the words to. Her mother, Mwamba, steps out. From the hut, her arms open wide to welcome her. Mwamba, with a warm smile, says, "Amina, my child, the earth is glad to see you home." Amina's heart swells with love for her mother, but inside, a deep unease simmers. The village is where her roots are, but the city calls to her too. Kofi, her cousin, approaches, his voice brimming with excitement. Kofi, looking toward the horizon, says, "You've been gone long enough, Amina. It's time to leave this dusty old village behind and see the world. The city awaits, with riches, power, a life of freedom." Amina hesitates, her voice quiet, uncertain. "I don't know, Kofi. I don't know if I can leave everything I've been taught behind." Kofi laughs dismissively, brushing off her concerns. "Taught? Come on. You know better than to hold on to these old ways. The city is where success is born. This place, it will trap you." Amina looks toward the sacred mountain in the distance, her voice soft. "But this is where I come from. This is where our ancestors speak to us. It's not that simple." "Kofi!" Mama Zuri, the village elder, steps forward. Her presence commands respect, her silver hair catching the fading sunlight. She is the keeper of the village's spirit, its history, and the voice of the ancestors. Mama Zuri, in a calm and measured voice, says, "Amina, Kofi, it seems the winds of the world have brought you both to the crossroads. But beware, my children. The winds speak in riddles, and not all promises lead to good roads." Amina, feeling the weight of her words, looks at Mama Zuri. Mama Zuri continues, her eyes locking with Amina's. "You must not be quick to turn your back on the old ways. December is a sacred month. The rains are upon us, and the spirits of our ancestors stir. To ignore their call is to invite chaos." Kofi, dismissing the warning, smirks. "Mama Zuri, you're old-fashioned. Times have changed. The world is bigger now. The city is where we will find our future, not buried under the weight of these old prayers and customs." Mama Zuri's voice sharpens. "The city is a place of many illusions, Kofi. It offers wealth, yes, but at what cost? You forget that wealth without wisdom is a dangerous thing. And the spirits? They remember. They never forget." She turns to Amina, her voice softening. "Amina, child, the road ahead is not for the faint-hearted. If you seek to leave, you must first honor the spirits. Only then will the path be clear." Amina, torn, feels a stirring within her. The village's pull is stronger than ever, but doubt lingers in her heart. Later that night, Amina sits beside Isi, her childhood friend, by the fire. The stars twinkle overhead, ancient eyes watching over them. The flames crackle, casting dancing shadows. Isi speaks gently, her voice like a soft whisper. "You must listen to Mama Zuri, Amina. I've seen too many come and go, leaving in search of something beyond the land. But they forget. They forget that the earth speaks to us. The spirits speak. They are not just shadows. They are the foundation." Amina looks at Isi, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The city pulls at her with promises of freedom and opportunity, yet Isi's words resonate deeply within her. Isi sighs, her gaze fixed on the fire. I know you dream of more, Amina, but you must first honor the past. We must seek the Spirit's guidance before we take a step forward. Amina stares into the flames, the weight of the decision heavy in her chest. The fire crackles louder, as though urging her to understand the importance of what Essie has said. The next morning, as the village prepares for the sacred ritual of prayer before the rains, Mama Zuri gathers the villagers. The air is thick with incense, and rhythmic drumming fills the atmosphere. The time for the cleansing prayer has arrived. Mama Zuri addresses the gathered crowd, her voice strong and clear. Today, we honor the spirits. Today, we ask for their protection as the rains begin. Amina, Kofi, come forward. The villagers fall silent as Amina and Kofi step forward, the drums beating louder, their rhythm pulsing like the heartbeat of the earth. Mama Zuri raises her hands high to the sky, calling upon the ancestors. Ancestors, hear us, guide our children on their paths, that they may walk in wisdom and not in pride. The land calls, the spirits stir. We honor you this day. We honor your teachings. Amina feels the weight of the ritual, the presence of something greater than herself surrounding her. For the first time since returning, she feels a deep connection to the village, to her ancestors, and to the land beneath her feet. Amina whispers softly, I have heard your call, and I will listen. As the ritual ends, the drums fade, and Amina stands still, her mind now clearer than it has been in weeks. She has made her choice. The wind picks up, swirling the leaves around, as if the spirits themselves are stirring in the air. Amina knows the path ahead will be difficult, but with the guidance of her ancestors, she is ready to walk it. Amina sat on the wooden bench, the heat of the afternoon sun beating down on the village, her thoughts swirling like the dust devils that danced across the earth. Kofi, her cousin, stood by the edge of the river, his eyes distant, fixated on the flowing waters that seemed to carry the promises of a life beyond the village. You must see it, Amina, Kofi said, his voice full of energy. The city is a place of endless possibilities. The bright lights, the tall buildings, the streets buzzing with life. It's freedom. Freedom from this village. Freedom from the old ways. Amina's heart wavered. The pull of the city, with its promises of wealth and success, was strong. She had seen it during her months of study. The city that never slept. The city that spoke the language of modernity. But in her chest, the old world of Ngwabe still beat. Its songs, its whispers, its stories. I know, Kofi, she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. But I also know the village. I can feel the spirits here, the ancestors watching over us. I don't want to abandon them. I don't want to forget where I come from. Kofi laughed, a soft, dismissive chuckle. The spirits? Amina, the spirits can't feed us. The village can't feed us. The city is where the future is. This place, it's full of old stories, old ways that hold us back. Don't you want more than this? He turned to face her, his eyes filled with the fire of ambition. We can be something greater, Amina. You and me. We can leave this place behind. Amina felt the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She wanted to believe him, to trust in the future he painted. But deep within, she heard the voice of Mama Zuri, the elder, the keeper of the village's wisdom. Mama Zuri's voice was like the rumble of thunder, deep and resonant. She had been listening from a distance, her aged hands folded before her. The elder's presence was a calm contrast to the storm brewing between the two young cousins. Don't be fooled by the promises of the city, Mama Zuri spoke, her gaze firm and unyielding. The spirits of the ancestors do not take kindly to those who leave without their blessing. The month of December is sacred. The rains stir the earth, and the winds stir the spirits. You cannot defy what has been ordained." Kofi's eyes flashed with impatience. "Mama Zuri, I've heard your stories before. They are just that, stories. I've seen the future, and it's not in these old beliefs. The city is where we belong." Mama Zuri's eyes narrowed, and her voice became sharper, like the crack of a dry branch. "The spirits are not to be taken lightly, Kofi. They are the guardians of this land. If you leave without honoring them, you will pay the price." Amina stood between them, torn. Her feet were rooted in two worlds, one foot in the past, in the traditions that shaped her, and one foot in the future, in the city's promises. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Asi, Amina's childhood friend, found her by the sacred tree, where the villagers often gathered for prayers. Essie's eyes were filled with quiet concern. "Amina," Essie began, her voice soft but firm, "do you really think you can leave without honoring the ancestors? The spirits are restless, and you know it." Amina sighed, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her decision. "But Kofi is right. The city holds so much more, so many opportunities. I can't stay here forever, Essie." Essie stepped closer, her hands folding in prayer. "And I'm not asking you to stay forever, Amina. But you must remember the way of the elders. Before you go, you must ask for their blessing. You cannot ignore their wisdom, not without consequence." Amina's heart ached as she looked at her friend, whose faith in the old ways was unwavering. "I don't know what to do, Isi. I'm torn. The city calls me, but my heart feels heavy when I think of leaving like this." Isi's voice was quiet, filled with the weight of generations. "I know, my friend, but remember the words of Mama Zuri. The spirits are watching." The next morning, as the mist rose from the ground, Mama Zuri approached Amina with a gift. In her hands, she held a bracelet, simple yet beautiful, made from sacred beads that shimmered with a soft, ethereal glow. "This bracelet," Mama Zuri explained, "is the gift of the ancestors. Each bead holds the spirit of a past elder, a guardian of this land. It will protect you, Amina, should you choose to leave. But it will also remind you of what you carry with you, the weight of our traditions, the responsibility of our people." Amina reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the beads. There was something about the bracelet that felt alive, as though the spirits themselves were speaking through it. She felt an unspoken connection to the village, to the land, to the stories that had shaped her. I don't know if I can wear it," Amina whispered, feeling the weight of her internal struggle. "I'm leaving, Mama Zuri. I'm leaving to chase my dreams." Mama Zuri's gaze softened, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. "The spirits will guide you, Amina, but they will not be kind to those who forget them." Amina took the bracelet and tied it around her wrist, its beads cold against her skin. She didn't know why, but as the bracelet settled, a sense of unease washed over her. The weight of it felt heavy, not just in her hand, but in her heart. That night, the sky darkened quickly, and the rains began to fall. They came without warning, heavy and unrelenting, flooding the earth, making the roads impassable. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes wide with fear. "The spirits are angry," they whispered. The winds howled, and the sacred mountain of Ngwabe seemed to tremble, as though the earth itself was warning them. Amina stood at the door of her hut, watching the rain pour down in sheets. Her heart raced, and she felt the weight of Mama Zuri's words pressing down on her, but she pushed them away. The city was calling. She had to leave. That night, as the storm raged outside, Amina lay awake, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The bracelet that Mama Zuri had given her felt warm against her wrist, its beads pulsing like a heartbeat. But there was something else, something deeper. She drifted into a restless sleep, and when she closed her eyes, She found herself standing on the edge of the sacred mountain, looking down at the village below. The sky was dark, and the earth trembled beneath her feet. In the distance, the faces of the ancestors appeared to her, their expressions stern, their eyes filled with sorrow. "Amina," they spoke in unison, their voices like a distant thunderstorm. "The path you choose will not be without cost. The city is not the answer. Honor the spirits before you leave, or the price will be high." Amina woke with a start, her heart pounding. She was drenched in sweat, her breath quick and shallow. The dream, the vision, had felt so real. But as the morning light crept through the cracks in the door, she pushed the memory away. No, she thought, it was just a dream. A warning, perhaps, but a dream nonetheless. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist, the beads still warm against. Her skin, she would leave, but deep down, Amina knew that the spirits were watching, and she could not escape their eyes. The storm outside continued to rage, and the village of Ngwabe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that was yet to come. The day broke in gray hues, the kind of morning when the air is thick with something unspoken, and the earth feels heavy beneath your feet. Amina and Kofi stood at the edge of the village, staring at the path that lay before them, dark and treacherous, like the road to a different world. The village, with its muddy paths and simple huts, seemed to hold its breath as they took their first steps toward the unknown. Above them, the sky was as heavy as a heart burdened with sorrow, with clouds rolling in fast, as if trying to swallow the sun whole. "I'm not turning back, Amina," Kofi's voice was determined, cutting through the weight of the silence. His eyes, full of excitement, looked past the rain, beyond the mountain, toward the city. "The world is waiting for us. We will make our fortune there." Amina, despite the call of the city in her heart, couldn't ignore the tightening in her chest. The ancestral bracelet Mama Zuri had given her, wrapped tightly around her wrist, felt heavy. Its beads seemed to hum against her skin, as if warning her of something she couldn't yet understand. But Kofi was already moving ahead, striding forward like a man whose mind had already been set. He hadn't heard Mama Zuri's warning. He hadn't felt the ancestral pull. To him, the city was freedom, and the old ways were chains that bound the people to poverty and superstition. As they journeyed, the road grew steeper, the rain harder. Amina stumbled, slipping in the mud, but Kofi was already far ahead, his back to her. "Come on, the city won't wait forever," he shouted over his shoulder. Amina's feet dragged, the weight of the journey pressing on her heart. She looked back at the village, feeling a twinge of guilt, but her resolve wavered when she heard Kofi's voice growing fainter. She wiped her tears and trudged on, despite the unease growing within her like a storm about to break. The sacred mountain of Ngwabe loomed in the distance, its tall peaks shrouded in mist, as if it were watching them. The road to the mountain was winding and treacherous, and with each step, Amina's dread grew heavier, the air thick with spiritual tension. She glanced down at the ancestral bracelet. The beads were cold now, colder than they'd ever been, and a chill ran up her spine. "Kofi," she called, her voice trembling slightly. Kofi didn't turn back. He was lost in his thoughts of the city, the future that promised wealth and power, and he didn't hear her voice tremble with doubt. The mountain grew closer, its massive form towering over them, and then, as if nature itself were responding. To Amina's unease, the storm hit. The sky split open with thunder, and the rain fell in torrents, drenching them within seconds. The winds howled, pushing them back as they tried to move forward. Kofi cursed under his breath. "This is nothing. The road is a little tough, that's all." But Amina felt the weight of the storm differently. The land seemed to pulse beneath her feet, and she could feel the spirits watching, waiting, judging. Suddenly, the river that had once been calm now roared, swelling like a beast awakened from sleep. It surged with such power that the path ahead was completely submerged. Kofi's eyes widened in disbelief. "We can't stop now." "We will keep going," he shouted. But Amina could see the river's power, its ferocity, and it was clear to her that they could not cross. The rain intensified, turning the path into a sea of mud. The storm was no longer just a force of nature. It was a sign. Amina grasped the bracelet tightly, the beads now burning against her skin, as if the spirits themselves were screaming at her to turn back. But Kofi, ever defiant, stepped forward, ignoring the rising waters. "Come on, Amina. Don't let this old storm stop us. We will make it," he shouted. In the fury of the storm, they made their attempt to cross. Their vehicle, now hopelessly caught in the flood, was swept away by the violent current. Amina screamed. As the world around them seemed to unravel, mud, water, chaos, and they were tossed into the wilderness, away from the path they had set. Struggling, they crawled to a small patch of dry ground, shaken and cold. The storm raged around them, relentless and unforgiving. The road to the city, once a dream, now seemed a distant fantasy. They were stranded, alone, in the heart of nature's fury. As the winds howled, Amina began to hear something. Faint at first, then louder, clearer, the sound of voices, soft whispers that seemed to call her name, distant yet familiar, as though the very spirits of the ancestors were speaking to her. She clutched the bracelet, her heart racing. "Kofi, do you hear that?" Her voice trembled with fear. Kofi was too caught up in his own fear and anger to listen. "It's nothing. It's the wind, the storm. It's just the storm." But Amina's eyes were wide with terror. The whispers came again, closer now, so real, so alive. Her name, called out by voices long past, her heart pounded. "Amina, you have ignored us," came a voice, soft yet commanding, carried by the wind. "Return, child, return before the spirits claim you." The storm grew fiercer, the winds howling, louder as if the ancestors were angry, disappointed. Amina fell to her knees, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. She closed her eyes, her heart heavy with regret. And then, in the midst of the storm, something appeared, a figure shimmering in the rain. Amina's breath caught in her throat as the vision before her became clearer. It was her mother, her face soft, yet filled with sorrow. Her eyes, though distant, were filled with love and an unspoken understanding. "Child, you have strayed far from the path." Her mother's voice was gentle yet firm. "The ancestors will not forgive this. You must return before it is too late." Amina's heart shattered as she looked at the spirit of her mother, the woman who had always guided her with love and wisdom. Her voice quivered. "But the city, the life we could have there, Kofi." Her mother's eyes softened. "What is the city, Amina? A place of promises that may turn to dust. What is it worth if you lose your soul in the process?" Tears filled Amina's eyes. The weight of her mother's words sank into her heart, and she knew, deep within, that she had made a mistake. The pull of the village, the traditions, the ancestors, these were the things that truly held power. But as Amina knelt, her heart filled with sorrow, the storm began to calm. The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the winds died down. The warm, ancestral spirits were watching, waiting for her to act. Amina knew what she had to do. With trembling hands, she held up the bracelet, her voice rising above the quiet storm. "Ancestors, I am sorry. I have ignored you, and I ask for your forgiveness. I will return. I will honor the old ways." At that moment, the air seemed to shift, the storm's fury dissipating into calm. The land seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as though the balance had been restored. Kofi stood beside her, bewildered, his anger replaced with confusion. "What are you doing, Amina? We can't go back." But Amina stood tall, the weight of her decision settling within her. "We have to," she said softly. "The city can wait." And as the winds whispered around them, the journey back began, one not of defiance, but of humility and redemption. The storm, once a threat, had become a lesson. Nature, the spirits, and the land would always have their say. And Amina, with the wisdom of her ancestors, would now honor that ancient call. Amina and Kofi trudged along the rain-drenched path, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, their clothes soaked and clinging to their skin. The storm had passed, but the weight of the journey, the storm's fury, and the weight of their decisions pressed down on them like a mountain. Every step back to the village felt like an eternity. The path that once seemed familiar, now strange and foreign, as if the earth itself had changed in the wake of their misadventure. The air was still thick with the scent of wet earth and the distant rumble of thunder, as if even the sky were mourning their failure. Kofi walked with his head lowered, his face pale. He had once dreamed of the city, of new beginnings and fresh opportunities, but now the city seemed like a distant, unreachable dream. He had thought he could escape the past, but now it had caught up with him in ways he hadn't imagined. Amina walked beside him, her heart heavy with regret. She had been so eager to leave, so certain that the city held the answers to all her questions. Now she realized that the city was just a place, empty without the wisdom of the elders, without the guidance of the ancestors. She had forsaken all that for a fleeting promise of something better. But what had it cost her? As they approached, the village, the familiar huts, and the sound of children laughing in the distance should have filled Amina with relief. But instead, a coldness settled over her. The village, once a place of comfort, now seemed like a place of judgment, a place where her decisions would be measured, where her mistakes would be laid bare. The villagers had been waiting for their return, their faces a mix of concern and relief. There were no angry shouts, no accusations, just quiet whispers and the soft murmur of voices. Mama Zuri stood at the front of the crowd, her face solemn yet filled with understanding. When she saw Amina and Kofi, her expression softened, and she opened her arms to them without a word. Her embrace was not one of reprimand, but of compassion. It was as if she knew the burden they carried, the burden of their choices, and offered them solace without asking for an explanation. The villagers gathered around them, their faces filled with concern, but also a quiet gratitude. Mama Zuri led them to the center of the village, where the elders and other villagers were waiting. The air was filled with the aroma of incense, the smoke curling into the sky as the community prepared to give thanks for their safe return. The fire in the center of the square crackled and flickered, casting long shadows on the faces of the people. Amina stood quietly, her eyes cast downward. She could feel the weight of their eyes upon her, the unspoken words in the air. She had betrayed. The village betrayed the very land that had nurtured her. She had ignored the teachings, the warnings, and now she was back, empty-handed, with nothing to show for her defiance. Mama Zuri stood beside her, her presence a steadying force. The elders began to chant, their voices rising in unison, calling upon the ancestors to guide them. As the fire crackled, Amina could feel the heat of it, but it was not just the fire that burned. It was the fire of her own guilt, the fire of her realization that she had strayed from the path. Her heart ached as she thought of the ancestors, who had watched over her, who had protected her, and who now mourned her disobedience. The cleansing ritual began, the villagers moving in harmony, their bodies swaying to the rhythm of the prayers. Amina and Kofi stood before the fire, the flames licking the air, their hearts heavy with regret, but also filled with a quiet hope. As the elders called out to the spirits, Amina closed her eyes, her thoughts drifting back to the villages, teachings, to the wisdom of Mama Zuri, to the stories told by the firelight. She had always known that the old ways were not to be dismissed, but she had been blinded by the allure of the city, by promises of progress and success. Now, as the smoke rose into the sky, Amina understood. The ancestors had not abandoned her. It was she who had abandoned them. The ritual was not just a cleansing of the body, but a cleansing of the soul, a chance to renew the bond between the living and the spirits, between the past and the present. The fire crackled as the last of the incense burned away, the smoke swirling into the night. Amina felt the presence of the ancestors around her, their spirits watching over her, their voices murmuring in her ear. She could hear them now, clearer than ever before, their wisdom flowing through her. She understood, at last, the true meaning of her journey. It was not about escaping the past, but about understanding it, about honoring the old ways and the wisdom of the village. The city had promised her freedom, but it had also promised to strip away her roots, to sever her connection to the land, to the spirits. But the village, with its rituals and its teachings, was her true home. The old ways were not obstacles to progress. They were the foundation upon which true progress could be built. Kofi stood beside her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. The city still called to him, its promises of wealth and opportunity still lingered in his mind. But he had seen the power of the ancestors, the strength of the village, and he had felt the weight of his own mistakes. He too had been swept away by the storm of ambition, by the desire to break free, to leave behind the traditions that had shaped him. But now, as he stood in the circle of the elders, he could feel the change within himself. He stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Mama Zuri," he said, "teach me. Show me the ways of the elders. Help me understand what I have been blind to." Mama Zuri looked at him with a mixture of pity and pride. She had known from the start that Kofi's heart was not yet ready to embrace the old ways, but now she saw the shift in him. She nodded, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "It is not too late, Kofi," she said. "The path of the elders is long, but it is never too late to begin." Amina turned to Kofi, a soft smile on her face. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet understanding between them. The city, the modern world, would always be there, but so would the village, so would the spirits. And it was only by balancing both that they could truly find peace. Amina closed her eyes once more, her heart full of gratitude. She lifted her hands to the sky, offering a prayer for guidance, for peace, and for balance between the old ways and the new. The ancestors had listened, and she knew that their guidance would always be with her, as long as she remembered to honor them. The fire burned brightly, casting its light across the village. Amina stood tall, her heart lightened by the cleansing, her soul healed by the ritual. The storm had passed, and with it, so had her doubts. She knew now that the old ways were not just a path to the past, but a bridge to the future. A future that could only thrive if it was built on the wisdom of those who came before.